Hi everyone at Rosebery Primary, it's Adam here from Real Schools. Just wanted to give you a little quick follow-up video as a bit of a summary of the day of what we worked on together. There were a few different themes we worked on this time, and there were a few familiar old chestnuts that we touched on as well. Those familiar old things that are really important to recap, basically what we call our three main restorative instruments. So that's thinking about, number one, the restorative continuum that runs from informal through to formal, and just thinking about where it is that you can jump in and have the most impact. When we're talking about culture, it's certainly those small behaviours. So that stuff at the informal end about effective statements and effective interactions, where you've got the greatest scope to scoop up the amount of, the number of interactions that can happen at that end and make them restorative in nature. And that's when you're contributing to a really strong relational culture. The second instrument that we looked at was very much those restorative questions. And remember that they're a guide. They're no script. And despite what you might hear in some places, it's not about getting the question card out every time somebody does something. It's about just putting hand on heart and saying, can we use questions like these to say that we went from past to present to future whenever we're dealing with conflict or tension? If you're doing that, then you're very much behaving in a restorative way. And then it's just those operating domains of thinking about where you're sitting in terms of to, with, for, not, because what we're trying to do there is to balance firmness and fairness, and just knowing your defaults, knowing where you slip to. And there are, of course, times that you will need to go out of the with box, but whether you have to go or whether you make a slip in your practice, it's always really important to do the mapping that takes you back to the with box, no matter what. And what that's contributing to is the behaviour elevation chart that you might now be starting to see around the school, which talks about how we're bringing those three main instruments to life, and then unpacks in a bit of detail how we're supporting each other to make that happen. So that should really very much be a critical piece for the school as we're moving forward, becoming more and more restorative as a school community. We then got practical. We started to look at, for instance, that scenario between Max and James, and a bit of yelling out in class and a bit of nasty language being used, and how we could know that there are many different types of responses that teachers can use. And it's not always what we use, it's how we use it that will determine whether it's a more of a with strategy or whether it slips out somewhere else. We then went into the day a little further. I guess what we try to do on a day like this is not only lengthen your understanding of restorative practices across the continuum, but also deepen it. And when we're trying to deepen that understanding, we have to get clear on the idea of shame. So what we did start to explore was those two different types of shame that unfortunately get melded into one when we're talking a lot of the time about working in a busy school, or indeed working with parents, and how it doesn't feel comfortable to say that shame should belong in our school, but shame actually is a very normal emotion, and it exists for a reason, and that's to ignite or to amplify our conscience. So what we're trying to do is to have kids experience shame. They need to know that when they do the wrong thing that it does actually impact other people, but we want them to experience it in a reintegrative kind of way, which is using a restorative process, rather than experiencing it in a stigmatizing kind of way, which is what applies labels and has kids really burring up about being far too focused on outcome. So getting clear around shame was something that we did on the day. We then moved our way down to the formal end of the continuum and had a look at conferencing and what that looks like in a school. And so it's really important that you know that's available to you. There's a high investment of time involved when we're talking about conferencing, but there's a low frequency. And setting up a conference of a formal or even semi-formal nature for kids who return from suspension would be a great place to start for a school like yours. And I guess one of the last things we did was have a look at things like restorative consequences. It's really important to know where that fits. And in fact, a lot of schools, it's around consequences that they get lost on the restorative journey. So understanding that restorative practices can and does include consequences, but the best consequences, the ones that contribute to the potential of a change in behaviour, are those that are meaningful, those that are relevant, those that are negotiated, and those that are known in advance. And if you can tick off on all four of those things, particularly for our recidivists, for our repeat offenders, then you can be confident that the consequences are contributing to a possible change in behaviour. And always remembering that if we are going to apply a consequence around time, that we don't swing across to applying consequences at the expense of restorative practices. We double dip. So every kid who's kept in at lunchtime, or forfeits a privilege and has to stay at school, or is internally suspended, should be engrossed in restorative language and engrossed in restorative conversations the whole time they're in there. So we give ourselves the best chance of those kids who trouble us the most having the gap close. We finished the day having a look at some ideas around some other behavioural models, such as the ABC model. We had a little bit of fun with the staff Christmas party concept, and how what that's about is being able to identify that in schools we jump in too late. We jump in between the B and the C, and what we need to do is to start to think about those antecedents, and that's the cultural conditions that you're creating. So we're getting pretty fair income now with restorative practices. We've got a really good base of the school that's been built over several years now. And what we need to do is to make sure we keep challenging ourselves. So I hope that you can use this video to keep challenging yourselves, to keep pulling parts of it out and having discussions about it in staff meetings or indeed in your professional learning teams, and keep the momentum going. Momentum's incredibly important when you're trying to build a restorative school community. It's not something that happens overnight. It's something that we need to work on really, really long term around. And I congratulate you. The work that you're doing is fabulous. It was a privilege for me to come back and to work with you in a professional learning capacity, but also to work with you, in classrooms and around the school, and to connect with parents again. It's something that, with my history at the school, makes me incredibly proud. Well done, keep at it, and remember, you're in partnership. info@realschools.com.au if there's anything that you think I can help you with. I'll talk to you soon.